Welcome back to a new year of Ancient DOS Games videos. I felt we needed to start the year off strong given the atrocities of 2020, so I managed to finally snag a quote-unquote cheap copy of this exceedingly hard to acquire game, Zeliard. So why is this game so hard to find and so expensive when you do? No freaking idea. But I've been wanting to cover it since nearly the very beginning of the show over a decade ago. But even before retro game prices shot through the roof, this thing was already rare and already pricey. Well, now that I own it, the bigger question is, was it worth the wait and the cost to acquire? Well, probably not. But I mean, it's by no means the fault of the game. Given when this game was originally made back in 1987, the graphics are extraordinarily good, the music is excellent, there's tons of story to get stuck into, the controls are simple, the gameplay is simple, level design is sometimes aggravating, but never too convoluted. But wow, this game is not only very long, but very hard every step of the way. It's also got a heavy Japanese anime vibe to it, contrary to the box art, which is nearly the exact opposite of anime. I'm looking at it here. Also, this is just the box shot grabbed from online. I do have a legit copy now, but it's only the discs because I was not paying the hundreds boxed copies tend to go for. Actually, before we dive into the inner workings of this game, now's a good time to answer a couple of questions about it from my Patreon supporters. In particular, Alex asks, how would you say the game compares to other Sierra titles? While Simovahinen asks, which NES existing such games is it most inspired by? The thing to remember about Zeliard here is that, yes, it was published by Sierra, but started life as a PC-88 game in Japan made by Game Arts, who up to that point only had two other games under their belt, Thexter and Sylpheed. So this was more a matter of Sierra still wanting to publish everything Game Arts was making, but since the PC-88 didn't exist in the North American market, they had to wait for a DOS conversion before they could bring it over. Thus why this game plays nothing like anything else Sierra was making, since Sierra didn't technically make it. As for which game it's inspired by, the most immediate comparison is Wonder Boy and Monsterland, which came out a few months prior in Japan. However, it's more likely the direct inspiration was Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, as that game predated both of those considerably, and has many of the same gameplay aspects, such as going to side-scrolling towns to buy items and magic, and blocking attacks with a shield, which needs to be lowered temporarily to do sword slashes. Zeliard may have originally been developed by Game Arts in 1987, but it wouldn't be until 1990 when they'd completed a DOS version for Sierra Online to publish elsewhere in the world. It's a one-player action-adventure hack-and-slash platforming game, which is quite a mouthful, so let's just call it an action-adventure, with support for a variety of video modes and a typical array of sound and music devices for the time. Now, a couple notes on all of this. Firstly, the video support is interesting in that the EGA mode only uses 8 colors, but applies them using a sort of dithering effect, as seen with the Thexter games, with all graphics in the game encoded as 6 bits per pixel, allowing for a theoretical total of 64 colors when taking the dithering into account, though it ultimately ends up being more like 36 due to repeats in the palette using this technique. The MCGA mode, though, does its best to replicate those colors, and while I find the MCGA mode to be easier to look at because there's no dithering, and because the colors tend to be more vibrant, I'm using the EGA mode here, not just because that's how it was originally intended to look, but also because there's a higher resolution font used in this mode, which is definitely easier to read. Also, the game touts Sound Blaster support, but really, there's no digitized effects anywhere in the game, so this is another game touting it simply to avoid confusion, due to Sound Blaster cards being fully ad-lib compatible. As for its current release state, it's still commercial and not available in a legitimate digital format anywhere. Not yet anyways. A lot of Sierra stuff has shown up on GOG and Steam, so I'm still holding out hope this leads to GOG and Steam getting some Game Arts titles in the future. But for now, Zeliard remains exceedingly difficult to get legitimate copies of. My copy was just loose discs, and it still ran me a little over $40 US, to say nothing about how much fully boxed copies cost, or heaven forbid, sealed copies. Yeah, unless and until legitimate digital options become available, you're pretty much stuck forking out tons of cash, or going with less legitimate options if you want to try this game out. Zeliard has quite the story to it, but fortunately it's not too tricky to summarize. The game takes place here on Earth in an alternate timeline, where, far in the distant past, a demon lord from another galaxy had managed to seize control of the entire planet. One day, the ruler of the kingdom of Flishka made a prayer to the spirit of the Holy Land of Zeliard, and was thus granted the power to seal this evil demon away using the 9 holy crystals called the Tears of Esmazanti. For the next 2,000 years, this evil remained sealed and the world knew peace. However, one day an eternal storm began in the kingdom of Flishka. For the next 7 days it rained non-stop, blocking out the sun and soaking the world. On that 7th day, Princess Felicia, daughter of King Felishka, descendant of the original king who sealed the demon away, was standing out on the balcony in the castle, lamenting the unrelenting rain, when suddenly the rainwater turned to sand, began to coat the land around them in dryness and desolation. Before the princess could even run to warn anyone, the demon Jashain makes his return, turning the princess to stone as a warning to all who would oppose him. It doesn't take long for the king to discover what's happened, and then for the next several days, he and the people of his kingdom all descend into sadness, as it seems that a new age of darkness is upon them, and no one has any idea what could even be done to stop this demon lord. However, while weeping over his daughter's statue, the king sees and hears the words of a ghostly apparition claiming to be a spirit from the Holy Land of Zeliard, stating that the one who will bring salvation is already on his way to the kingdom and must be guided to reclaim the Tears of Esmazanti from the demon's underlings who are now guarding them. As the spirit disappears again, the king feels his sadness must be driving him to madness. But sure enough, the very next day, a stranger by the name of Duke Garland appears in the kingdom, apparently having been guided by holy spirits himself, though with no idea why. He's escorted before the king, who explains everything, and while Duke Garland confirms that he knows not why he was guided to this kingdom, his heroism leads him to pledge his life to Jashain's defeat. Who then makes a brief appearance to taunt everyone, but that just makes Duke Garland even more determined to stop him, as he runs out of the castle to begin his journey. Yeah, that was me summarizing the backstory, not counting the time burned on the title screen and credits since they become unskippable if you let them play out for more than a moment. It takes the game a little over 11 minutes to go through the entirety of the backstory. Combined with being able to talk with the townspeople, you can definitely get sucked into the story here if you want to be. Though before we move on, I just have to say, this may be one of the extremely few games ever made where you can do this. Yeah, I seriously paused the title screen. Part of the reason I focused on the story so heavily is because the gameplay is actually incredibly straightforward. The controls are very simple, as you have your arrow keys to move around, jump, crouch, and climb, spacebar to attack, the left Alt key for casting magic or for cancelling out of menus, and the Enter key brings up your inventory screen. Well, that said, whenever you're in town, you're locked out of jumping and attacking, with the attack key instead acting as a talk key for talking to whoever's standing in front of you. Now, thankfully, you don't have to be super accurate with the positioning either. So long as whoever you want to talk to is in front of you and isn't more than a couple tiles away, you should talk to them just fine. Now, you're going to be spending a lot of time in the towns because the various useful locations you can visit all like to draw things out with dialogue, which is a good thing if you're trying to get immersed in the game, not a good thing if you're trying to speedrun this thing. Now, the different locations you can visit in each town include either an inn or a church for healing up, a bank for handling your cash, a weapon shop which also sells and repairs shields, a magic shop which sells consumables for you to use, of which you can carry up to 5 at a time, and each town also has a sage you can talk to. Now, after the first town, most sages will give you a new magic spell the first time you talk to them, and the sages are also able to give you guidance as to where to go and what to do. Plus, they can save your game and raise your experience level once you have enough experience built up. When you leave town, you typically end up in various caves and caverns. But while the game has a feeling of non-linearity to it, it's actually a very linear experience, as there's typically only one correct way to go to make progress, and it's often locked off, requiring you to find a key first to continue forward. The combat gets very tricky very fast though, as your sword does not hit very far in front of you, at least not in the beginning of the game, so it makes it extremely easy to end up getting too close to the enemies and taking damage. Now, that said, you do have some options in this regards. If an enemy's above you, or if you're jumping, Duke Garland will automatically do a rotational slash instead of a standard forward slash when you attack, which can hit things above him even if they're behind him. Plus you can hold down when falling, and your attack will do a downward stab, which is difficult to make effective use of, but certainly helps in some spots. And just like with Thexter as well, you need to be sure to attack the walls every chance you get. Objects are often hidden in the walls to help keep you going, usually healing potions, but sometimes almas are hidden as well, or sometimes you'll even find key items required to make progress, or not necessarily required, but extremely recommended so as not to make progressing further an absolute chore. In fact, let's talk about the difficulty, because my word, this game is super hard. It doesn't help that when you start the game, you have very little health. Though, funnily enough, you gain your first level after killing just a handful of enemies, though it doesn't happen automatically. Whenever you think you've collected enough almas to level up, you need to go visit a sage and see what they have to say. Their dialogue will change somewhat depending on how close you are to leveling up, and if you do get a level up, you'll get a full restore as well. However, each sage can only level you up a limited number of times, after which you need to ask other sages to do it for you. Plus, the number of almas required increases exponentially, so it's actually pretty pointless to try to grind experience levels, and thus it's often better to just take them as they come. Oh yeah, the almas. So at the bottom left, you see counters for both golds and almas. Golds are money, plain and simple. If you die, you lose all of your golds, thus why making a deposit at the banks is often a good idea. But almas are slightly different. The way it's written in-game, every alma acquired immediately counts towards your experience, though in actuality, experience and almas are tracked separately. So effectively, almas are just another kind of money. But the trick is when you decide to cash them in. The banks are able to convert collected almas to gold, and the exchange rate varies from town to town, with the beginning towns and one town very late in the game having the best exchange rates. If you die, you lose half of your almas. Well, back on the subject of difficulty, I should point out that despite how frantic things can get, most enemies have a trick to dealing with them without taking any hits. For instance, if you can keep the bats right behind you, Duke Garland will do his rotational slash and can hit them while running away from them, making the bats much safer to deal with. Alternatively, if things are moving just a bit too fast for you, you can adjust the game speed. The default setting between 0 and 9 is 5, and while I feel 4 is more comfortable for my playstyle, the default of 5 actually times out better to the music, so I decided to play at that speed, even though it was a shade faster than I would have preferred. Well, even the bosses tend to have tricks for dealing with them. The first boss jumps around every so often, so all you have to do is stay close and run under the moment it jumps. The second boss has a very powerful and deadly water pulse attack, but can only fire one at a time, so if you can time your jump to get over it as soon as it's fired, you'll have ample time to get a bunch of hits in before you have to back off and prepare to jump over another. The third boss is extraordinarily difficult to do safely since its attacks are random, but you only take major damage from it if it swoops into you. So I find the best tactic is to get in close and do lots and lots of standing jump slashes, since it takes much more damage from headshots than body shots. As for the fourth boss, I didn't make it that far. So yeah, I didn't complete the game, not by a long shot. It took many hours to get as far as I did without a walkthrough or map, and when I finally decided to look that stuff up to see how much more gameplay was ahead of me, I realized it'd probably take me over a week to beat this thing. Again, the difficulty does not relent in the slightest. In fact, there's a little bit of a debate between Zeliard fans as to whether this version of the game or the original PC-88 version is harder than the other, as there's some curious differences between the two. On the one hand, the PC-88 original is a lot more stingy with equipment, and everything's more expensive to buy, meaning grinding is now something you kinda have to do a lot more of, but for money instead of for experience. Though naturally the experience doesn't hurt. Also, when you block a melee strike from an enemy in the PC-88 version with your shield, you still take half damage to your health, whereas here in the DOS version, the shield will block the attack entirely, and you still get knocked back as though you took damage. On top of that, monsters give considerably less experience in the PC-88 original, and the bosses don't drop any almas whatsoever. So in that regards, you would think the PC-88 original would be more grindy and more difficult. and for the most part, it is. However, the DOS version compensates for some of these differences with two very notable drawbacks. The first of which being that most consumable items are considerably weaker in the DOS version. Well, yeah, you can acquire them much more easily, but they turn out to be much less effective overall. However, the biggest drawback by far is with respawning. In the original PC-88 game, if you die or use a Kyoku feather, you return to the last sage you spoke to, similar to pretty much any typical RPG up to this point. In the DOS version though, if you die or use a Kyoku feather, you always return to the sage in the very first town you started in. Now, given how linear the game is, and given how difficult it can be just dealing with the regular monsters or some of the platforming, recovering from a death and getting back to where you were can be excruciating. It's even debated as to whether this is a bug or not, since the variable to track the last sage spoke to exists in the DOS version, it's just never updated. But at the same time, going back to earlier towns often gets you better exchange rates on almas, so yeah, there's no definitive answer on this one. There's a couple last things I want to point out too, one of which might confuse new players. In your inventory, you're going to see a wear section, which shows that you're wearing nothing. And for a solid several hours of your first run through the game, you're not going to obtain anything to fill this section. But since the weapon shop owner remarks on repairing your armor, it almost seems like this is where armor will go. But nope. The wear section is primarily for shoes and other accessories that you'll get later on, which help in dealing with various environmental hazards. The first pair of shoes helps with dealing with the icy caverns, and while I caught a glimpse of them, I never actually found my way to collecting them. The other thing I want to point out ties in with the game's already superb presentation, in that if you go into a location that deals with cash and leave without exchanging cash in any manner, you get different dialogue than usual. And in fact, the weapon shop owner gets really mad and pounds his fists on his countertop. Oh boy, do I have so many mixed feelings about this one. Again, the presentation is incredible for when it first came out. Not as impressive by the time the DOS port was made, but still up there when compared to everything else available on DOS PCs at the time. But the level of difficulty is way up there too, and it never relents. This game starts hard and stays hard. Even when you know exactly what you need to do, the tile-based movement could trip you up surprisingly often. Especially when dealing with climbable ropes and such, which I later figured out you can only grab while standing still, or within the very first frame of a jump, thus allowing you to jump between climbable ropes right next to each other if you're fast and precise about your inputs. The extreme expense of acquiring a legitimate copy of this game doesn't help either. Quite frankly though, I really hope this and the other Game Arts games make it to GOG and elsewhere eventually, given how difficult they are to obtain nowadays, especially Zeliard here. If and when the game becomes more readily available, I would say anyone with an interest in this style of hack-and-slash platforming who wants a long and difficult challenge should give this one a go. But for the moment, it's really just limited to those with cash to burn or no qualms about going with less legitimate downloads. So until that time comes, I'd only recommend the most hardcore of hack-and-slash platforming aficionados take on this challenge. Fortunately, this one's extremely easy to set up in DOSBox. Just leave cycle set to auto and you're good to go. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next week we'll be giving a game a second pro video treatment, to pretty much do the exact opposite of what we did in its first pro video. So be sure to tune in next Saturday to see how that one's gonna go down. Thanks for watching everyone, and extra special thanks to everyone supporting me on Patreon. Here's just a small selection of you guys.